Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into some massive changes hitting Colorado's firearms and ammunition landscape. Whether you're a policy wonk, a legal scholar, a firearms enthusiast, or just somebody who wants to understand the nuts and bolts of these new state laws, you are absolutely in the right place. We are going to strictly rely on the legislative texts, legal complaints, and policy center summaries to understand exactly what is happening in Colorado right now. So let's just dive right into it. Can a state actually levy a specific commercial tax on a constitutionally protected right? Is this just a standard mechanism to fund public safety, kind of like how a highway tax pays for fixing potholes? Or, by singling out firearms and ammo, does it basically build a financial wall around the Second Amendment? Keep that fundamental question right at the top of your mind as we unpack exactly what Colorado lawmakers and voters just put into motion.
All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the new checkout reality, unpacking Proposition KK, ammo sales and age limits, those fascinating 19th century gunpowder taxes, and finally, the sin tax debate.
Section 1. The new checkout reality.
Okay, get ready for a 6.5% jump at the register. Because honestly, this is the most immediate, tangible change you're going to feel walking into any sporting goods store or local gun shop in Colorado. Thanks to the passage of a ballot measure known as Proposition KK, which kicks in on April 1st, 2025, Colorado is now literally the first state to approve an excise tax on firearms and ammo through a ballot measure. Basically, a tax on a new 6.5% excise tax on the net taxable sales of firearms, firearm precursor parts, and ammunition. And to be clear, this doesn't replace your standard sales tax, it is stacked right on top of it. So if you're a retail vendor ringing up a box of ammo or a new handgun, that 6.5% hits those net taxable sales. Now there is a small carve-out. Vendors making under $20,000 a year in retail sales are exempt, and sales to active duty military and law enforcement get a pass too. But for the general public, this is your new checkout reality.
Section 2. Unpacking Proposition KK.
Now what's really interesting about this is where that money actually goes. The state estimates this 6.5% tax is going to generate something like $39 million every single year. That's a lot of money. But it doesn't just vanish into some vague general fund. The legislation actually carves out exactly where every single dollar goes to remediate the impacts of gun violence. The vast majority of it, we're talking $30 million, goes straight to crime victim services. From there, $5 million is earmarked for veterans' mental health services, $3 million goes toward youth behavioral health, and $1 million is set aside for school security upgrades. By anchoring the policy in these hard numbers, the state's framing is super clear here. They designed this tax to create a direct financial pipeline to support safety, healing, and recovery programs all across Colorado.
Section 3. Ammo sales and age limits. But it's not just about the money being collected. It's also about who can actually buy ammunition and how that transaction even happens. This brings us to a new law called HB 251133. Starting in July 2026, the baseline age to buy ammo jumps up to 21. On top of that, all retail ammunition sales have to go through a registered vendor, and there are these new mandated delivery notifications for shipped ammo. But as we know, legislation is rarely one-size-fits-all, right? Lawmakers built in some very specific exceptions to try and balance these rules out. Active military members and veterans, they're completely exempt from the age limit. Plus, 18 to 20-year-olds can still buy ammo if they're physically at a designated shooting range or if they have a valid hunter education certification. So you can see a direct attempt here to balance these new restrictions with the traditional realities of hunting and sports shooting.
Section 4. 19th century gunpowder taxes.
So here's the big question. How does the state legally justify these new financial and age restrictions under modern constitutional scrutiny? Well, it all boils down to the Bruin Standard. Back in 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court laid down a totally new framework with the Bruin decision. In plain English, courts can't just weigh the government's interest in public safety against the Second Amendment anymore. Nope. Instead, the government literally has to prove that their new firearm regulation is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. Basically, if a state wants to pass a gun control law today, they have to prove to a judge that early Americans were totally fine with similar laws way back in the 18th or 19th centuries.
And this is exactly how Colorado lawmakers are trying to pass that Bruin test. They literally wrote their historical defense straight into the text of the excise tax bill. Check out this quote from the legislation. An 1883 California statute directed local governments to provide for payment of all revenue assessed as a tax on the storage, manufacture, and sale of gunpowder to fund a firemen's charitable fund. So the state's argument here? They're saying, look, Just like California taxed gunpowder in 1883 to fund the folks dealing with fire risks, Colorado can tax modern ammunition today to fund the professionals dealing with the risks of gun violence.
And brilliantly, they didn't just stop with California. The state dug incredibly deep into the historical archives for this one. To build their case, lawmakers actually cited historical commercial and occupational taxes on weapons in Mississippi from 1844, North Carolina from 1857, Georgia, Alabama, and get this, even the then independent Kingdom of Hawaii in 1870. The strategy is crystal clear. They want to build such a massive list of 19th century gunpowder and weapons taxes that the courts basically have to throw their hands up and concede that taxing arms commerce is a deeply rooted American tradition.
Section 5. The Sin Tax Debate. All right, let's shift gears and look at the pushback, because the exact same 6.5% tax is viewed in completely different ways depending on who you ask. The state frames this whole thing as a necessary historical mechanism for funding public safety and remediation. But on the flip side, Second Amendment advocates frame this as a punitive sin tax. Now, a sin tax is traditionally slapped on things society actively wants to discourage, like alcohol or tobacco, right? Advocates argue that treating a constitutional right like a vice is fundamentally wrong. They view this entire policy as basically a backdoor method to price law-abiding, working-class citizens right out of their ability to exercise their right to self-defense.
And you know, this tension even extends down to the actual packaging of the products, which creates a really fascinating paradox with those HB 251133 delivery rules we mentioned earlier. Sellers absolutely must formally notify delivery providers, like FedEx or UPS, that a package has ammunition inside. But at the same time, the bill strictly prohibits labeling the exterior of the package to indicate there's ammo in it. The state's intent here is purely about safety. They obviously don't want a box sitting on a porch advertising to thieves that it's full of valuable bullets. But advocates look at this and see yet another contradictory, totally unnecessary layer of commercial regulation that just makes it harder for legal businesses to operate efficiently. So the crucial point here is that whenever any new regulation is passed, people are going to read the fine print. And advocates quickly discovered a massive loophole in this new excise tax. Think about it like this. If you buy tobacco out of state and bring it into Colorado, there is a super strict use tax provision to make sure you still pay that hefty sin tax. But according to advocates, lawmakers actually failed to include a similar use tax provision for firearms. That means an individual could potentially just call an out-of-state shop, buy a firearm over the phone, paying a lower local sales tax, have it shipped to a local Colorado dealer, pay the standard $25 background check fee, and legally avoid that new 6.5% Colorado excise tax entirely. It just goes to show how incredibly difficult it is to draft bulletproof commercial regulations on interstate goods.
Which brings us to our final big-picture thought. Where exactly is the line drawn between commercial regulation and constitutional infringement? Can a state really tax the commerce of arms based on some 19th century history? Or does modern taxation effectively price everyday citizens out of their fundamental rights? As these laws inevitably get tested in federal courts, the answers aren't just going to shape Colorado. They could honestly set a precedent for the entire nation. It's this incredibly delicate balance of history, taxation, and individual liberties. And frankly, it's something every single one of us should be paying very close attention to.